In this video, we're going to sort out the render for our granular collapse and advection scene. So let's get into Cinema 4D. So here we are on a new scene, and this is going to be our 3:2 crumble and an advection, but we need to borrow some elements from our previous file, like the lights and the camera. So let's go to File, Open, and we want to go to, well, it's in our, here's our MoGraph folder. We've got our render build subfolder, and then we've got our 4 crumbles. So let's just open the last one, open that up. And so here, look at the top, we've got our scene objects, so we definitely want those. So let's hit Control and C, that's our camera and lights. Then we'll go to File, New, and then Control V to paste those in. Fantastic, there they are. Let's just go back. We're going to take one more element from here, actually. So one of the reasons why this kind of whole animation works as a composition is that there's kind of continuity between numbers, and part of that is done through the color choices. So what we want to do, if you remember our crumble, if I just switch that exposure off, and let's just start our cycles real-time preview. If you have a look, our crumble has this orange color on the inside of our 4 and 3 characters. So what we want is the 3 grains that are going to appear underneath here, they want to initially seem like they are this same orange color, which will give us some great continuity. It's also the color of the exposure effects smoke as well. Let's just switch that off. So to do that, let's just take our 3, actually no, look, we'll get our principled node. This is our, oh no, actually, no, this is our principled volume. So this is for our smoke, but actually we could take this one as well because we do have a smoke element. So let's copy this one, and we can also just copy our number 4 material as well. Hit Control C. We'll go back to our new file. Let's just shut that down, go to our material manager here, hit Control V, and now we've got our 2 materials, and we'll kind of revert back and make some changes to these. So we've got a smoke material, and we've got a material that contains the correct orange color that we're going to need. Great. So now we need to bring into this scene our 3 sand kind of collapse animation. So let's go to File, Open. We'll just open it separately. Let's go to our MoGraph countdown folder. And where do we want to go? We want to go to 3. Actually, well, it's 2 advection, isn't it? This is the one that has the 3 grains and the 2 advection all cached. So let's just click on here, open this up, and let's just have a look at what we've got. So this is all cached. Looking really cool. Love it. And then at some point, we will then get our blue smoke advection coming out. So that's looking fantastic. So what do we need from this? Well, we need pretty much everything, don't we? We need our exposure effects advection. So let's just go onto that cache tag and hit copy tag data. We need our, we don't need this emitter EFX source, so that's fine. And so we just need that. So let's copy that and our cache and hit Control C. And then we'll go to Window, our new file, and hit Control V. All right. So there we have our cache. So have a look. There we go. Yep, that's in there. Fantastic. So let's go back to our 2 advection scene. So let's bring in the grains now. So let's open up our grains, system. So we need our emitter spawn and our grains. Remember, we spawned some new particles to fill in the gap. So let's go to both of those cache tags and hit copy tag data. And we'll take both of those emitters, and we need... what am I looking for? I'm looking for my cache object. Okay, so it must be the same cache object. That's fine. So let's hit Control C. Let's go to Window, back to our new file, Control V. Yeah, so we're all cached up. Fantastic. That makes life easy. Okay, so let's just go to our scene camera. And here we go. So everything now should be working. Our number 3 and then into our advection. Excellent. So let's just have a quick look at our original advection scene. How many? Look, we've got 220 frames here. So let's just make sure we've got that amount in our new file. So just we've got enough to render all of that cached information. So 220. All right. And let's just kind of flick around here. Yeah. And then that kind of dissipates. So we want to render this all the way to here. Yeah. Fantastic. Right, so just for now, let's switch off our exposure effects and advection. So we'll just get a bit of faster playback. So now what we want to do is render these particles. So we'll go to our, let's go to Startup, Cycles 4D Layout. There we go. Now obviously we're not seeing anything because our emitter has no material on it. So what I'm going to do is, let's just put on our number 4 material. This is the one we copied in from our previous file, but we're going to rename it. It's not number 4. Let's just call it number 3. And we need to make some changes because obviously this was set up to mix 2 materials using our attributes interfaces on our shatter objects. And obviously we're not doing that anymore. So just for now, let's just get rid of the mix shader, and we just want the orange principled BSDF. So I can delete that one, delete this interfaces attribute, open this up, stick that into the surface, and put our 3 onto our emitter grains. Perfect. And we can put the same one onto our emitter spawn. Okay. So I mean, it looks lovely, doesn't it? All right. Even with this one bog standard material, it's looking really nice. All right, so what do we need to do here? Well, remember, if you've seen our viewport, our particles, we cached in these color values from 100% to 0. And remember, it was a gradient on the Z depth. So the further away from the camera, the lighter those particles are. And what we want to do is we want to use this black and white color information, color value information, to color these particles differently. So how do we do it? Well, we can access that particle color information by doing this. Let's just get us a little bit more room. Right, so what we need is a node that can read particle information. So let's right click, let's go to texture, and what we need is a, actually no, it's an input, my mistake. It's an input, and we need a particle info node, because we're taking data and we're going to input it into something else. So a particle info node. And what this node is, Cycles 4D can read all of this data that's contained within our X-Particles, and it can use that in the materials. And so it's really powerful. You can use all of this data can be used to texture particle simulations, which is great. What we're going to do is use the color channel. So if I click on this color channel, we'll get a preview of it. And now look, Cycles is reading the same color gradient that we have in our viewport. So it's working. Fantastic. So now all we need to do is remap those black to white values to a color ramp. So let's go right click, converter, and we want a color ramp node. And let's put the color of the particle into the factor, and then put the color of that into our principled base color. So now it's black to white. And now all we have to do is create this color ramp. So let's do that. Let's just give ourselves a little bit of room here. Right, so here's our color ramp. So let's make the black needs to be the same as our orange. Hang on, let me go. Let's just take that off. So the black node, let's take the picker, needs to be this orange. And the white node we're remapping to this is going to be the color of the final particles and the last bit of smoke, and we might need to make some adjustments to this, but it's going to be a kind of a blue a blue colour like this. So something along those lines. And then you're getting these really nice purples in the middle. So that's looking pretty nice. Let's just have a look at our orange. A bit more saturation. I'm just looking at the saturation because we want a little bit more of a saturated purple colour there. All right, so now we have our gradient. Let's put this gradient into our base colour. And there we go. Look, we've managed to remap this gradient using our black and white values from our original sim. So really simple, incredibly powerful. Let's just have a look. It's looking really nice. Okay, so what else do we have? Let's maybe increase the specular. So we've got a bit more of a glint in there. That's nice. And we'll just go forward a few frames and just see how it looks. Let's just let some of these samples chug through so we can get a proper idea of how this is looking. And it looks really cool, doesn't it? Really nice colours. Now, obviously, I've said this a lot before and I'll say it again. We're working at not necessarily production level resolution here. And what that means in relation to a grain simulation is higher resolution would mean loads more particles which are smaller, and that would give you even more interesting detail in these kind of shadowy areas. But it's still looking, even at this resolution, this is looking nice, and when it's animated it's going to look really, really cool. So I'm just thinking that our orange, especially when we're here on first frame, needs to perhaps be slightly brighter. So let's go into our color ramp, onto our orange color, and let's give it full brightness, slightly less saturation. Okay, something maybe like that. Then let's just come to a bit where we can see our purple. Let's make a knot where our purple is, give this a bit more saturation. And a bit more lightness. That's perhaps slightly overdoing it. Maybe a little less saturation. Okay, that's looking pretty cool. I mean, look, we want this to be nice and garish, don't we? And then we're going back to our blue. So let's just move this along. Fantastic. So that's looking really cool. Very, very simple material, getting that color data from the particle and passing it on into one node, our principled BSDF. So I'm really happy with that. Yeah. Okay, so let's just call that one done. So now what we need to do is look at our exposure effects simulation for this. Let's go to our exposure effects and advection and switch this on. Let's just switch our two grains emitters off just for the time being, so we're not having to chug through as much data. And let's move forward to a frame where we've got some smoke. Here we go. So let's now look at our smoke. So what we have got is our principled, this is our principled volume texture that we built to create our orange dust in our 4 crumble scene. So let's just drag this one onto our exposure effects. Let's just move forward a few frames. Okay, so what we need to do here, this is an interesting point. This doesn't look right, does it, in our viewport? This looks like the remnants of our number 4. So what's happened is we've copied this across from one scene, and if you remember, our point density texture, which reads exposure effects information, needs, if you look at the attributes of that node, it needs an object in this window so it knows what to reference. And it was referencing our 4 crumble simulation, and we copied it across here. And now it's held on to that in this frame. So what we need to do is drag in our new sand advection simulation, and then it displays correctly. Okay, so that's obviously an important step. And my gut feeling here is we are going to need to have this as a thicker sim. So to create a thicker smoke, we just go to our maths multiply node and let's just increase that value. Much thicker, all right? And we could do with, let's just see if we can get away with, instead of this cubic interpolation, oh look, I've done the number 1 trick again. Let's put that back to 40, come out of there. And let's, in our cubic interpolation, let's try if we can get away with linear, which will give us a bit more detail. Yep, that's looking better. All right, so now what we need to do is change the color. So what we really want to do is borrow this blue knot here. So let's just click on that. And what we do, let's go to our color wheel. And, well, what we could do, look, let's make a swatch for this. So we'll go to the swatches and let's drag this blue. Just call it, I don't know, blue smoke. Okay, there we go. Right, so then we go to our principled node here. Let's go to our color. And we want to look at our swatches. And here's our blue. So we want to pick this as our color, drop it in there. And now we have the same blue. Now it's a little bit over the top, isn't it? But that's our starting point. Okay, so let's have a look. Let's have a look. If we put a little bit of absorption in here. So let's go to our absorption color and let's pick the same blue. And let's then go to our Cycles 4D settings. So look, remember, we haven't actually selected Cycles 4D yet. So let's do that. And remember, we made our render settings preset. So let's hit render settings. Let's go to load preset, cycles start, which sets us all up for cycles. Let's go and give this a bit more volume depth. Let's see what happens if we put let's put 2 ray bounces and 2 volume depth. Okay, which should lighten it somewhat. Let's put 4 volume depth, 4 ray bounces. Okay, and what we need to do is just adjust this blue color somewhat. So let's go back to our HSV and let's just bring down some of that saturation. Maybe a little bit of the value. We want it to be quite a prominent blue, really, and this is going to contrast with a green colour. So something like that, and then let's take our multiply, let's just reduce the strength of this smoke somewhat. It's a bit thick. That's perhaps too much. Let's go down 30 maybe. I'm just going to reduce the size of our render preview. All right, looking pretty cool. Let's have a look. Let's take our emitter grains. I'm going to leave my spawn just off for now, just to get an idea of how this is looking with the grain. So there's our orange. Crumbles down. This is looking awesome. We've got our blue just poking through, which is right at the bottom of our gradient. And then the advection comes. Here comes the smoke. Very nice. And it's coming round. So let's just follow it round. Actually, we could, just to speed up our viewport, we could go to our exposure effects, go to display, turn the display off. We don't need to process that display in the viewport. Looking very nice. And here is when we're going to reveal our number one as the smoke makes its way into the middle. So that's all looking very nice. Let's just put our spawn particles on as well. Thicken that up a bit. There we go. Looking great. So we'll just move this along a bit. Move it along, and then by frame 172 it's all disappeared. Great, so we're pretty much there really. Let us just have a look at our samples now to make sure that we're going to get an appropriate quality. So let's just increase the size again, which obviously it takes a little bit longer to render when you have a bigger size, but we get an idea of the quality. So we've got 22 samples in our real-time preview. Let's just have a look at this as it clears up. All right. I'm thinking perhaps our smoke needs to be a little bit thicker, you know. You can see a little bit too clearly through here, and I want this to feel like thicker smoke. So let's just pause that. Let's go to our math multiply, and actually let's just put it back up to where we were. Something, say 40, which will give us a thicker smoke. Let's have a look at that. Yeah, we could even maybe go up to 50. Yeah, I'm happier with that. And now we've gone thicker, we could perhaps take the color value of our color and just lighten it slightly. And likewise, our absorption color. Okay, yep, that's better. So now we've got a thicker smoke. Some of these particles are kind of occluded by that smoke. That's looking nicer. So we'll stay with this and we'll wait for these samples to run all the way through. So you can see this is going to be a much slower render because we've got a much higher resolution volume render going on here. We've got millions of particles as well, so it is going to take longer. But for me, I'm looking at our 22 samples and this 484 path samples, and I think we're going to look okay. Noise-wise, this isn't looking too bad at all. It's looking really nice. So let's let this chug through. Looking excellent. Okay, so I'm going to be happy with that. In fact, if anything, look, I'm pretty happy with the noise level here, and we haven't got anywhere near through that full amount. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this 20 samples. Give it a go and see how it looks. Actually, just before I do, just before we go with our final one, let's put it on 20. I just want to show you another setting which is important to be aware of when we're rendering volumes like exposure effects. If we go to our render settings, to cycles, and we go to our, where are we? We have a volume sampling menu here. Let's just switch everything else off so you can see that. Yeah, okay. So here's my volume sampling, and what we have is a default size, step size of 10. And what that's saying is it's saying that it slices the volume into steps. And if you get a very, very thick smoke, sometimes you can start seeing those steps as slices. And if that's the case, you have to reduce that down. So what I'm going to do is just let's see, on a much better quality volume render would be with far fewer steps, but you have a huge hit on your render time. So let's put this down to 5 and let's render this out, and let's see if this is going to provide us with a little bit more detail. So we're just going to go forward a frame to reset everything. Here we go. So you'll see that this is a much slower render with this volume, but it's using more steps, which means it should be a better quality. But what you really want to do with these step sizes, only really adjust this if you're seeing artifacts or stepping kind of like slices in your volume. Okay, so we've increased it, it's made it slightly better. What will happen is the very wispy bits will have a little bit more detail, and so when it dissipates it's going to probably look nicer, but the difference isn't hugely obvious. So let's just do a middle ground, and we'll go with our volume step size. Let's just put it up to 7. Okay, so it's better than the default, but it's not way down. Okay, so we're looking good. Let's start setting up our render settings then. So what we have got is, let's have a look. Device CUDA, correct, 1080 Ti's, fantastic. We can leave the tiling on default. The integrator and sampling, the samples we're going to put at 20. We don't need any clamping on this one because we haven't seen any firefly, so we can leave the clamping alone. Light paths and ray depth, we've got a 4 volume depth with max ray bounces of 4. So that's all good. Let's go to the film and make sure that everything is as it should be. Yeah, we haven't got any glass, so actually this isn't relevant in this one. All right, so that's all looking good. Let's go to our output. Now let's just double check again exactly how many frames we need to render here. We'll go forward to frame 159, and yeah, look, all of our volume, let's just hit play. Our volume is still there at 159, and at 170 it has disappeared. So we're going to do, let's go back to the render settings, and we'll do manual 0 to 170. All right, and let's go to our save dialog, and we'll do OpenEXR at 16-bit. We will render an alpha channel, and we will go to our file location. So where are we? Let's go render builds. Oh, actually, look, we've not been organized here. Let's minimize that. We haven't even saved out our file. That's a recipe for disaster. Let's save as. Let's get this organized immediately. Right, let's go to render builds, new folder, XP, countdown, 3, 2, just call that Advect, just so we know where we are. Very good. And that's where we're going to save. And we want to kind of know, we want to know where we've got this from. So let's just go back to our 2 Advection. I'm going to click on, this was my last one, version 10 version 4, which then places it down here as a shortcut. So then when I go into my new folder, 3.2 Advect, I've got that name, and I know exactly where this has come from. So I can press save. Okay, nah, that's better. So then let's go to our output, and we want to find our 3.2 Advect folder. We are going to do a new folder and call it render. Let's just hit this. And then in our render settings, we'll call the output this name so we know exactly what it is. Version 4, fantastic. Hit save. Right, and so we're ready to go. So let's just come out of that. Oh, actually, before we do, let's just go back into our render settings and double check. And yes, look, now this is a really important thing to be aware of. This is a real gotcha. Remember, we brought in our Cycles 4D start render settings. This was in our preset that we made here. But look, we don't have it selected as the preset that is actually going to be rendered. We still have the just default My Render settings active. So if we hit render now, it's just going to render this with these default render settings, look, which will be the standard renderer, so it's just going to render black, and we don't have any of our file paths or anything saved. So that's not going to work. So it's a really important thing to be aware of when you're bringing in these preset render settings. We must change this to the active renderer, otherwise that isn't going to work for us. Okay, so now that is done, that is fine. We can get saved up and we can get this rendered out. So I'll pause it here. Once that render's finished, we'll have a look at how it looks, and I'll tell you exactly how long it took. So here we are in After Effects. Here is our render, and it wasn't actually as long as I'd first envisaged. The frames with the exposure effects sim with the kind of most dense volume of smoke were the longest. They were about 2 minutes each, but in total this was just over 2 hours for those 170 frames, so that's not too bad at all. And it's looking really good. Pleased with this. We've got this fantastic crumble at the beginning, drops down, then we've got our advection, and our smoke then dissipates. So a couple of things to point out. First of all, I think we're going to retime, well, we will be retiming this when it comes to compositing. In this simulation, the speed of which the smoke billows out and advects those particles is a little too slow. It's not really dynamic enough. So we're going to go at normal speed, and at this point, whoosh, we'll do a bit of a time remap to speed that up and then get it down to normal speed as this smoke dissipates. So that's the first thing to point out. The second thing to point out is any granular solve that you do looks better the higher res it is, so the more particles with a smaller radius will look better. I'm really pleased with this though. Even at this resolution, I think it looks good, but you'd have even more realism if you had obviously far more particles that were smaller. And the only other thing to point out is our smoke's looking nice, but right at the end as it dissipates, can you remember in our point density texture we used the linear interpolation, which gives you much more detail in your smoke, but when you have a sim that's maybe not high res enough, it starts to look voxelized a little. And we can see that effect happening here as it dissipates. And it's just because the camera is so close to the smoke and it's not high resolution enough, it really kind of illustrates and almost paints out our voxel size. So one thing we could have done would have done it in cubic interpolation, which would have smoothed that out, but then our detail wouldn't have been as nice at this point. But what we'll do at the compositing stage is we will probably just use a little bit of blurring to cheat that as it fades away, and that won't be noticeable. And at this point anyway, we're going to have our number one contrasting green smoke, which is kind of going to be the hero of the shot anyway, so our eye isn't actually going to be looking at this blue, but we will fix that at the compositing stage. But all in all, that one is looking good. That means we're ready to move on to our final render setup, which is going to be our number one reveal. That one's coming next.